Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today on simple JDE orchestrations that add big value. We've got a great agenda planned for today. We're going to do a brief introduction to Orchestrator and then jump into a live demo and show a couple of real-life examples. My name is Laurel, and I'm part of the marketing team here at Trillium. I'm really happy to be joined today by Brian Surface, Director of ERP Technologies, and Dan Barford, our Vice President of our JDE practice here at Trillium. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dan. Dan, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks, Laurel. So before I start, I just want to make sure everybody understands the best way to interact with us during this webinar. You'll notice there's a toolbar. It's usually on the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and it sometimes auto minimizes. So if you just kind of open that, there's a place to ask questions, and we'll collect those throughout the session and have time at the end for a Q&A. And then before I turn it over to Brian, I just want to do a quick introduction to Trillium. So as Laurel said, my name is Dan Barford, and I oversee our JD Edwards practice at Trillium. I've been with Trillium for almost 18 years and focused on delivering JD Edwards projects for our customers. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So we know JD Edwards, and we've been around a long time as an Oracle partner doing implementations, upgrades, managed services for support, and special projects. In the 26 years that Trillium has been around, you name it, and we've done it. As an extension of Oracle, we can help with your licensing if that's something that you need us to look at, or if you're considering a move to cloud applications or hosting platform for your JD Edwards environment. You know, we have experience in all kinds of support around the JD Edwards solution. This is some additional credentials on our services, all of which can be found on our website. So if you go to the next slide. And then I'd also like to thank everyone for joining today. As we've all had to adjust to a new way of working and living, we appreciate everyone taking time out of their day today to be with us. Working remotely is nothing new for Trillium. We have the tools in place for effectively communicating and collaborating as a team from wherever you are. In fact, our managed services team, which supports close to 100 JD Edwards clients, works remotely on a full-time basis. So it's something that we're very familiar with and have been very effective adjusting to in these times. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Surface, who will introduce you to the Orchestrator capabilities and show a demo. Over to you, Brian.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Laurel. Welcome, everybody. Just as Dan said, thanks for giving us a little bit of your time today. Hopefully we can provide some content that'll help you kind of, think of some new ideas, how to use Orchestrator, different ways that you can, add value to your system and really get some ROI from your end users by helping eliminate button clicks and screens to kind of automate and make the system a little bit more efficient for your business model. Real quick, and I'm sure most of you have seen this slide and know about Orchestrator, but just for those who may not, basically Orchestrator is a tool that sits on top of the application layer of JD Edwards. So basically when you're doing an orchestration, whether it's integration from outside the system coming in, or it's something within JD Edwards where you're automating something to go from one screen to the other, everything's sitting at the application level instead of the business logic level, which is what we're accustomed to with things like business services and when we do the event rule development. Now, the advantage there using the applications is not only do you get your configuration and your setup without having to do anything in addition, any customizations in your system come across. So it's really kind of a one-stop shop. Especially if you're using it for integrations where we, a lot of the times we'll see where we modified the system and now we got to integrate into JD Edwards, and now all of a sudden we're modifying a Z file processor or a business service, something like that. So it really kind of brings it all together and wraps it all up nicely for us in one package. So real quick, I wanted to kind of show the level of investment that Oracle's put into Orchestrator over the years. If you notice here, starting at 9.202, when it initially was released, it had some nice features to it, but as time has gone on, they've continued to invest and in many cases increased investment into the tool itself. And so now you see at 9.243, which was actually released last Thursday, we're now getting to the point where we can do debugging. We can call business functions direct. They're simplifying the interface and making some of the objects easier to use. So there's just a big level of investment starting around the 9.224 tools release to today. Now, one thing that I'll mention is I like to show this slide a lot because everyone may or may not be on the different tools releases. So it's always important when you are considering to do an orchestration that you kind of check in on your tools release, make sure you understand which features are available for you, and then you can kind of make the decision there on whether we need to upgrade tools prior to starting the project or if you're good to go with the release you're on. So it's always kind of important to do that. And that's a little bit different than what we've seen. My background's development, and those tools haven't really changed a ton over the years, and they do give us new features here and there, but Orchestrator, they've been giving us new features pretty much with every release. So once again, I wanted to kind of point out the importance of knowing which release you're on and what features you have available. So with that said, let's talk about the first example that we have today. So this one, basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to go in and we're going to create an item master record, and then we're going to create an orchestration that goes out and fetches a list of branch plants that we want to create the item branch records for. And also we're going to cross-reference some data. So when it's all said and done, you're going to be able to create the item master record, hit the OK button, and then the branch records will be automatically created, and we'll have some data that doesn't necessarily exist on the item master. That'll be pulled from some other areas. So conceptually, I'm going to show you some different ways to cross-reference data and to kind of build in some additional logic to once again, it reduces the amount of time it takes to get an item in the system, especially from a screen standpoint and a button click standpoint. So let me switch over to JD Edwards. So simply here, we're going to start by creating an item master record. And this is something that we're not going to need to orchestrate quite yet because this is basically where it's going to get kicked off. So I'm just going to go in real quick. Create a demo item. Fill in a couple of fields. And then go ahead and hit OK there. And then so now we can come out of the item master. Now I have a item master record that I can start using to create the rest of the orchestration. So from here, I'm going to actually go directly into the item branch screen. I'm going to go ahead and start process recorder. So for those who don't know about process recorder, this basically allows you to kind of kick off a tool that records your keystrokes where you go through different applications, things like that. And it speeds up the process of creating the what we're going to refer to as a form request component within an orchestration. My time working in Orchestrator, this has really sped up the process probably 100-fold. The early days before we had this, you really had to sit and write down, what clicks you're going to do, what fields you're going to enter, and really get that process down before you went in to create the orchestration. Now it's pretty much, you could, as a BA, you can even have, somebody that uses the application all day long, that you can get them to record a process and it'll create it all for you. So it's a pretty cool feature. So here we're just going to hit start. Go in and let's just go ahead and add the item. I'm going to start, just give it a branch plant. Then I'm going to add a few pieces of data here that we didn't have on the master record. And I'll show you what we're going to do with that in a minute. So this should click through that. And then we can close out. I'm going to stop. Go ahead and give this a name. And we do have a naming convention for each object. You'll notice here, so the FREQ is for a form request. So there are, while it is free form, we do like to stick to having standards. And we'll just do that, hit save. So now I have the ability to create that branch record, and now I'm going to go ahead and start building my orchestration. But before I do that, I want to kind of run you through some different design concepts I've come up for this one. So obviously, we have our item master record, and then now we're going to be able to do an item branch record. But we may have more than one branch, so we want to do multiple branches out there. So basically, what I've done is on the business unit master, I've designated a field, just a cat code. You can do cat code. You can really do any field you'd like. And I've created a set of records that I want to create an item branch record for each of these branches. So I started off by saying, okay, these are the branches I want to work with. I've tagged them now, and then I can use this in a data request later on to make sure I'm creating an item branch record for each branch I would want to every time. I've also, you noticed I entered in a planner number and a buyer number. So what I did with those is, in one case, I used a UDC, so a custom UDC, and basically cross-referenced my branch plant to my buyer number. So just simple UDC to do the cross-referencing. We do that all the time in interfacing and data conversions, things like that. I've also used the cross-reference. So Orchestrator has a component, it's cross-reference, and it actually looks at this application, the P95-2000. And this gives us the ability to create cross-reference types and then enter in different values. So you'll see in this case, I actually have the branch plants cross-reference for the planner number. So two ways, they're both doing the same things, but I just wanted to kind of show both types of concepts, just so you know you have options out there. So now let's go into the studio. So we're going to go into orchestrations. For this one, I can just create a new one, and I'm going to go in and hit the plus sign, and I'm going to go get my form request. So the nice part about this is you can also search. So you'll notice, as you go on, you start to have a bunch of objects here, but this way, you use these search options, it has a way to be able to get you directly to your object. And another thing to point out is, in this case, I just used demo for my prefix on my naming convention. But what I would suggest is, if you're creating an orchestration and it's going to probably have several objects associated with it, maybe come up with some sort of unique identifier for that orchestration, and in that way, as you're building it, so you don't have to sort through all the different objects that you've built over time, you can simply come in and use this search, and it'll always narrow it down to the orchestration components you want to work with. So for this one, I'm just going to add it here, and now I want to go in and I actually want to edit this form request, because as I entered in the data, it actually defaulted that in there. So you always want to make sure you're clearing the defaults out there. I mean, if you always have something passed in, it may not do something for you, but I always like to clear them out, just so I don't accidentally have data go in the system that I don't want. On the flip side, if you didn't have to cross-reference your planner and buyer numbers, let's just say you had one planner, one buyer that went across all branch plants, you could actually default that data here, and then you'd eliminate the need for the cross-referencing. So you can use the default values in that regard. just go through real quick, make sure everything's clean, it looks good. Let's go ahead and save it. So that would actually create the branch record. Just for time's sake, I'm going to flip over to an orchestration that I created that actually does all the stuff that we want, and I'm going to go through that kind of object by object to kind of show you what we did. So in this case, we're creating an item branch record, and this actual scenario will only create one record at a time, and I'll show you in a minute how I was able to get it to create multiple records over that business unit master file. So in this case, the first thing I want to do is I want to check and see if the item branch exists, because if you go into the application, form requests, they actually sit on the form spec level, so you can't version them. So you have to add some logic in there to kind of help the form extension fire when you need it to. So in this case, if I were to go in and create an item master record, and I had this orchestration behind the OK button, I don't want it to try to recreate item branch records if they already exist. I may want to have it update some fields, and we can do that. But I don't want it to try to add it, otherwise it's just going to error out. So in this case, the first thing I did is I came in and searched by item and branch in the 4102 file, and I basically did an aggregation account to see if something was found. So in this case, I created a variable item branch found YN for yes or no. I then incorporated that with a rule. So you'll see here, while I have the item number and the branch number getting passed in, I then get the value from the data request, and I actually pass it into the rule. And so the rule is pretty simple. It's just if the record count is greater than 0, then that's the true path. If it's 0, then it's the false path, meaning that the item branch record does not exist already. And then the rule can go true or false. So in this case, I'm only doing the false, I'm only doing adds, but in a real life scenario, you can certainly do updates through the true path. And we've done that several times with different integrations and automations within the system that we've built. But in this case, we're going to basically go through, only do adds. So if it doesn't exist, now we're going to go through and we're going to cross-reference that planner and buyer number. So in this case, I used a simple cross-reference object. And this is once again pointing back to that P95 2000. And basically, I'm just saying I want the business unit coming in, I want the planner number coming out, and then the object type is planners by branch plant. So if I flip back over here, that's what this cross-reference type is, and it'll actually cross-reference the business unit to the planner number. So that's just a simple cross-reference object. The other nice part about this is if the branch plant isn't cross-referenced in there, so meaning that the branch plant doesn't have a planner number exist, you can also do some error handling off of this. And in this case, I actually built in a notification to notify me with the business unit saying that this business unit we tried to cross-reference, it wasn't loaded in the cross-reference file. So if I do run this for a branch plant that doesn't exist in my cross-reference, I'll get a nice notification on the notification bell, basically saying that, you know, we tried to do something that wasn't cross-referenced, and then I can determine if I need to go in and cross-reference or not. So you can add error handling that way, or you could also do another data request with a rule and a notification that way, but it kind of simplifies it if you use the error handling built in the objects. So once I've cross-referenced the planner, I'm going to go cross-reference the buyer. And in this case, basically all I did was I went into the UDC table and basically passed in description 1, the business unit, and pulled out description 2. So if I go back into my UDC, description 1's the branch plant, made sure I did the padding on the front, and then I pulled back the buyer number. So pretty straightforward. Finally, I did the form request, and this is the one that we just created a little bit ago. And so that information that I've been gathering all gets passed into the form request. You also notice here I put in a version. And one kind of best practice as you're creating your orchestrations, you really should create versions specifically for your orchestration. And the reason why you do that is if for some reason you have a version out there, you have it in an orchestration, it might be scheduled or behind a form extension, you don't necessarily see it running all the time out there. And if a user has the ability to change a processing option or a data selection on a report, they may accidentally change the version you're using in your orchestration, and you won't know that that change happened until you start seeing some strange things show up in your system. So typically we recommend that you should create your own version for your orchestration and only use it for orchestration. So in this case, I just hard coded it as a default value within this form request. So you'll see here the branch plant, the item number, buyer planner, all getting passed in to create my branch record, and then that ends the orchestration. So once I've created this, I want to test it out. It's always important to test these out as you go. You can certainly build it and you get to the end, and then you have a bunch of objects and orchestrations that are kind of going off of each other, and if you have an error, you may not be able to track it down so easy. So as I build these out, once I build one process, I'll typically test it out. So in this one, I'm just going to go out there. I'm going to do my run orchestration. I'm going to use and let's just do M10. Give it a run. Oh, cross-reference failure. So if I go back to the cross-reference, M10, I'm not sure what happened there. I guess that's what we get when we do this live. So let me try it one more time. Well, seems to not be cooperating today. So go in and troubleshoot it really quickly. Branch plant should be there. Actually, I think I know. If I come in here, it's probably the padding. There we go. So it was a simple padding. It didn't pad it because that field isn't naturally padded for business unit. I actually had to pad the data in there, but I would need it padded down the road to be able to create the record in the form request. So you'll see here where it went in and it cross-referenced, came back with that. And then if I come back out into here, item branch, I've now created another branch record. So we know it works for one branch. So now let's go out there and we want to run it for multiple branches. And here's where I would suggest creating a second orchestration. So you got one orchestration that creates the record, and then you're going to have the top level orchestration that can create the automated process. And this is the one that we'll use for the form extension on the item branch screen. The reason why we want to do this is I want to fetch each of these branch records. So I created a data request again. And once again, I used this cat code 3 to determine which branch plant records I wanted to use when I create an item. And basically, I just did a filter, anything that contains MF, because I think there's an MFA and an MFP, and bring back the business unit. And just for fun, I had it bring back the description. And then you'll also notice up here where it says data set variable name, I put a variable name, and that's what's going to allow us to iterate over. So in this case, I have a connector. It's calling the orchestration that we just created to create the single branch record. But in this case, it's actually going to go over there and it's going to take the item number, the branch plant that we just fetched, and it's going to iterate over that branch plant array. So essentially, it's going to come back. It's going to return the 5 or so business units, and each time it has a business unit, it's going to push that through that orchestration. So it should, at the end of the day, it'll create all the branch plant records that I have listed right here. So this one I can simply go in and test. And this time I do not have to have a branch plant because it's going to go and just pull the ones from the table. So I run it. It created, it found these 5 branch plants. Same ones here. And now I have all my branch plants created. And I've also had all the buyer and planner numbers cross-referenced. So you can really do that with as many data items as you want. This is really just used as an example to show you the concept. But basically, this will go out there and it'll automate this process for you. So real quick, just for testing's sake, I'm going to go ahead and delete these. So I don't have those anymore. And now I'm going to actually implement this. So I want to go in. I'm going to do a, well, I'll do an ad. Let's just do another ad. So create another demo record, demo item. Actually, let me start this part over real quick. First thing I want to do is add the form extension. Sorry about that, I jumped ahead a little bit. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to open up the form extension manager. I'm going to go ahead and do an associated orchestration. I'm going to do it on the OK button. Generally, I'm going to do it on post button click, only because the validation would have occurred there. So if something did fail within here, it would not have fired that event yet. Come in here, I'll get my orchestration. You'll see here I have item number to pass in. You kind of have to track item number down up here. But I know it's kind of hidden behind that. And we'll just fire it out after the event. You have some other options here as far as how you want to run those. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save, close, save my form extension. Now, let's create the item. Go ahead and hit OK. That would have fired off the form extension. So now I go to this 9876 row, item branch. My records are created. And once again, the data is populated. So this is just another way to really, slim down the number of screens, slim down the button clicks. Like I said, you can, using either the cross-reference or a UDC or even a custom table, you can kind of build in how you want to populate some data that you may not have available on the item master side that you need to drive down to your item branch records. And like I said earlier, you could also create an update path as well as an add path. And then that way you kind of get the best of both worlds. So that's the first example of something that's relatively simple to do that could probably add a lot of value to your end users and your system. Second one I want to show is printing a purchase order, and we'll do it from a form extension again. But then we're going to take the output of the purchase order and we're going to send it to ourselves in a notification. So this eliminates me having to go in and find the purchase order I printed, or if you think of like a workflow light, maybe that purchase order needs to go to someone else in your group once you print it, so they can either send it out or they take it with the next step. So this is just kind of a way to automate printing a document in the system and making it easy to find. So let's go back out here, and first thing I'm going to do for this one, we'll just do another create orchestration, is I'm going to go in and I'm going to create this, and then we're going to go in and we're going to add a report data request. And this one will use a 43500. You'll notice here I already created a version specifically for the orchestrator. And now when I get here, I want to be able to dynamically pass values into this report. So I'm going to go ahead and do an override version, and I'm going to open up data selection. You'll see here I already have status code equal to 230, but I'm going to want to pass in the order information because ultimately this will be fired from a form extension that'll be pointing to the grid in the 4310, P4310. So simply hit add, and I can actually add a couple of these, and then I can come in here and I can search. And this is another nice search feature, is you can simply just type in the alias or part of the name, and all of this comes up relatively quickly. And now I need to create the input. So while here it'll let you, link it to another field. You can put literal values here. If you use this context, so it's the $ with the brackets. This actually is how you create the data structure, the path to pass data into these reports and make them run dynamically. It's important to get it right. If you do miss a bracket or the $, it will not show up. So do that for time's sake. Go ahead and hit add. And now using some of the features to kind of automate the process, I can go ahead and automap the inputs. So by pushing this button, it's made all of these inputs available at the front end of the orchestration. And then hitting the automap feature, it mapped them back. So it basically completed the link to be able to pass that data into the report. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save early, save often. From an output standpoint on this one, because I'm going to want to be able to pass some of the information into a notification, and that's how I will locate the report. I'm just going to go ahead and select all, and so this will actually pass back the report name, the version, the job number, and the server it was run on. So now let me go back into JD Edwards. I'm going to go find a report or a purchase order to print because I want to test this. So looks like order number 775. So let's just go ahead and give this a test real quick. Double check that real quick. Run. And see it passed back the job number, what server it ran on, all this information. And if I go back out here, job status, you'll see that it ran the PO for me. So now I want to link all that into a notification. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm actually going to go back out here. I'm going to show you a notification I built prior to this. And so for this one, I basically created 3 inputs: job number, server, and then order number. And then here I want to have a message, and I actually want to include that order number. So once again, I use the syntax to create a dynamic variable that will print in the subject line of my notification. And then if I go down into attachments, the link name to the PO is going to be order number, and then I pass in the job number, the server number, and then I want it to be a PDF file. So this is how I created the notification, passed all that data through, and this will essentially link, create this dynamic link to get back to the PO I just ran. So let's go back into orchestrations. And this is just to kind of speed it up. This is the report component that I had just created. And then I've also created this connector. And I don't think I went into it on the previous one, but I'll go into this one. But basically these connectors give you the ability to link notifications and orchestrations. You'll see here I can come in here and basically choose local orchestrations notifications, and then it'll give me my an option there, and I can also search and pull up, you know, the different objects out there. So you use these connectors, and that's kind of the way that you get to another orchestration or notification. In this case, I'm basically going to take the output from the report that I showed earlier. I'm going to pass the job number, the server, and then the order number that's coming from the inputs here. So now that I've created that, I'm going to go ahead and come out here and go to my PO detail screen, and I'm going to go ahead and clear these out real quick. And those are actually the error orchestrations from my cross-reference earlier. But basically, I've already created the form extension here. So I added this button. So you simply just hit the add button, and you can add a button, and I renamed it to PO print. And then I associated an orchestration to it by basically using that as the control on button click, pick my orchestration, and then I pass my grid data. So I'm passing order number, order type, and order company from the grid into my orchestration. And then that'll essentially run the PO and notify me that the PO is print. So let me go ahead and close this out. And starting at like 9241, you can actually, if I wanted to, I could print multiple POs, or I could just print a single one. And before that, in the 923s and the 922s, you could only, or actually the 923s, you could only print one at a time, even though you were allowed to select multiple. So in this case, I'll pick a few, hit run, come up here, 2 POs print. Go ahead and make sure that they print. The status got bumped. I did have a query on this screen to basically filter by next status 230. So I knew these were all printable based on my data selection. So let's just go out here, get my notification. I click on the number, then my PDF is here. Looks like it didn't give me data. Let's try this other one. There, that one looks a lot better. So example how you can either send it to yourself so you don't have to dig through the job status, or as I mentioned earlier, if you wanted to do some sort of workflow light, you'd be able to potentially send that off to another group so they could carry it forward. So that concludes the demo portion of the presentation. I would like to mention before we wrap up and take some questions that Trillium does offer a workshop that covers orchestrations and notifications. We have 25 or so exercises that we've created in-house. They go a little bit more in depth in explaining what you're doing, and actually they're broken down by object. So when it's all said and done and you forget how to create a form request using Process Recorder, you can actually go to an individual exercise that'll do that. So we have our own content that we use and we've developed over time, and we continue to develop more. Another part of this workshop, it's scalable. So, once we get through the exercise content, we like to work with your team, not only on creating orchestrations and showing them how to create additional orchestrations that are more specific to your business, but we also like to really take them through the whole design process. So when it's all said and done, not only do you know how to build them, you know how to use all the components, you also know kind of what goes into the design phase, and that kind of helps streamline your work going forward, so you don't have false starts, you don't miss steps, and it really kind of gives you the clear picture, or the full picture of how to utilize Orchestrator and develop different orchestrations. So, feel free. You can email us at WeKnowJDE@Trillium.com for more information. We also have a link on our webpage. You can go there and you can fill out some information, and we'll reach out to you and get a call set up to talk about what you would like to do in a workshop.
Thank you, Brian. So this is Dan again. And another thing too is, our managed services, I mentioned them at the beginning of this meeting, how they support, I really think we might have hit our 100th customer recently, and they do a really good job. So if you're not currently a managed services customer of ours, we are offering 10 complimentary hours just to try us out. That team just does a fabulous job, and they're familiar with the orchestration capabilities and how we're leveraging it across all of our customers now. Any new projects that we're taking on seem to have some component of process automation or using the orchestrator to facilitate the transfer of information. It's especially helpful even for connecting with the systems outside of JD Edwards and using it to pass data back and forth as an integration method. So lots of capabilities, and if you want to learn more or try out our team at no charge, let us know. And then
Great.
we'll go back to Laurel. Yep, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks again, Brian. So just one more quick thing, and then we do have some questions, so we'll jump to those here in 20 seconds. And if anybody has any questions you want to send in the meantime, we'll answer those here in just a second. So last final note, we do have a couple of upcoming events we wanted to make sure everybody knows about. So Quest Innovation Week is next week, if you're not familiar with it. This is, so it's next week, running April 20th through 24th, and it's a free online event. And a lot of the content is what would have been presented at the Collaborate conference. So the Oracle JD Edwards keynote with Lyle Ekdahl will be next week. And as part of this Innovation Week, there'll also be JDE product roadmap sessions. Should be a lot of good content. And Trillium will also be presenting another orchestrator session next Friday, and we'll be including some content on the latest tools release that was announced just last week. So that's happening next Friday, but it should be some good content all week if you haven't signed up for that already. And then we'll also be doing additional webinars starting in May. So we'll definitely send out an email about that, but you can also check out our website, trillium.com/events, for information on that. Okay, so now we'll jump into some questions. The first couple, I'm going to throw, Brian, I'll throw these to you. They're kind of related. So what tools release were you using? Is this Studio 8? And does Trillium recommend upgrading to the latest release?
Yeah, so the release I was on was 9241. So not the latest, but it is in the 924s, and that is when they released Orchestrator Studio 8 with that new look and feel. And I will say, just using the new versus the old, everything takes a little while to get used to, of course, but the new look and feel is way slicker, easier to use, more intuitive. At least I feel that way. And I definitely prefer it over the latter. But as far as recommending, obviously, it's dependent on the customer and their team and the ability to test and integrations, other stuff that may get impacted by the tools. But certainly I would recommend looking at 924 at least. The increase in features and, like I said, the new look and feel, especially if you're starting a project. We've had customers start projects in the earlier release and then they switch to 924 and there's some retraining that has to be done because of the interface change. So if you're starting a project, I would recommend getting to at least 9241, just so you're kind of on the new tool, the new look and feel to start, and then kind of going from there.
Okay, great, thank you. So we have a bunch of other questions that are coming in. One was to do with the process recorder that you showed towards the beginning. So the question is, I don't see a process recorder on my system. Is a specific permission ESU level required?
So the process recorder, and let me go back to a few slides here. So I believe the process recorder was introduced in the 9224. So it would definitely be a minimum requirement to be on that tools release. As far as it not showing up on the right-hand side in that drop down, that is most likely some sort of security or feature security not showing you that. So that's something that you may want to look at the feature security and make sure that you have that available to your role or to you as a user.
Okay, thank you. Another question here. Can you also create locations and pricing?
Yes. So it would be obviously additional orchestrations, but I personally have done a price update orchestration. You could also do locations. Anything that you can do in the applications, you can certainly orchestrate. And this was a pretty brief example of what you'd probably want to do with an item in real life. So certainly you can continue on and add cost, price, any type of location type information. You can do all that. I will say that doing the price screen is a little bit tricky because there's not a QBE line in there. So if you're expiring pricing and adding a new price line, there is some aspect of Groovy scripting that you're going to have to use to identify the line you want to expire and then identify the last row to create the new item. So that one is a little bit more on the complex side, but it can be done.
Okay, another question for you, Brian. Let's see. Can you explain the difference between using a built-in error notification from the first example and creating a notification second example and when to use them? Would you ever create an error notification outside of the built-in error handling?
Yeah, certainly. So, a few of the orchestrations that we've built, we want to confirm that transactions have occurred and things like that. So the error handling on the object level, a lot of times is more specific to that object. So, maybe that, you got an unexpected error on the application, or, maybe there was just something that went on that the transaction itself, or I guess the application itself, had an issue. And that you also have the ability to continue and abort. You can notify if you abort. So in a lot of cases, you would probably want to do that because if that transaction did not occur, you don't want to continue down your orchestration. As for using a a different method to do error handling, certainly you may want to put a data request, after you go in. Let's say you go in and you bump a status, and then you want to maybe put a data request just to confirm that the status did indeed get bumped to the correct status. And then if it did not, then you could create a notification off of that to notify you. And then you could put very specific data in that notification saying that, order 1234 did not update to status 240. And then you could actually embed a link to take you into that order. So you're exactly where you need to be, and you can kind of figure out what went on there. So there's definitely reasons for both. Generally, I do like to back up my orchestrations a little bit by doing some just brief error handling, either on the front end to make sure an item is valid, or on the back end to make sure that a transaction did occur, and then I can notify off of those using a notification object as opposed to using the internal error handling.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. So we have a decent amount of questions here. I'll definitely go through at least a few more. If we don't get to your question, we'll definitely make sure to follow up with you after the webinar. So next question. I have not installed Orchestrator yet, nor do I have an ADF server. I do have an AIS server. We are running on TR9.2.3.5 AS400. Let me know if you need me to repeat any of this, Brian. Can I install Orchestrator? Oh, you're on it. Can I install Orchestrator without adding an ADF server or installing TR9.2.4?
So you still need the ADF server up until 9.2.4. And then 9.2.4, you just need the AIS server. So if you have the ADF server, you're going to need the AIS server. And there's probably some other configurations that go on there. I'm not a CNC expert by any means, but you will need the AIS server installed, along with there's some sort of HTML pass-through server, I believe. And in the 9.2.3 releases and below, I believe the install of Orchestrator Studio is actually someplace else other than the AIS server. Once you go to 9.2.4, it's all on the AIS server. You no longer need an ADF server.
Okay,
so
next question.
If you're doing the install, you may want to do tools at the same time. I mean, I think, kind of do it all at once, because you're going to probably have to do some testing either way.
Okay. Okay, so next question, is Orchestrator able to replace interfaces?
Yes. Yeah, we've actually seen some traction out there. People looking to use it and replace business services. By no means is business services going away, but the skill set is a little bit easier to manage. And it can do a lot of the same things. Plus, if you have customizations in your system, before you would have had to either create a custom business service or modify your business service if you had, let's say, a customization on 4210 or 42101 that you needed to replicate in the interface. So there is some advantage there. As far as batch interfaces, obviously, if you can call a REST API from your other system, all of these orchestrations are REST services. Once they're created, there's no switch or anything that you have to turn on. They're automatically a REST service. So if you have that capability, you can make it more real time. We've also seen people use an orchestration to enhance their batch integration. So you could actually have the orchestration kick off your batch job to load the data, or you could consume a spreadsheet through the orchestration and load a table in the system, and then kick off your processors, and then you could have it do some error handling. You could do a data request to see if there were any errors in your batch process and notify off that. So you could really replace batch or business services, or you could enhance batch by doing it as well.
Great, thank you. So another question here for you, Brian. Can we call a master business function in new Orchestrator 9.2.4.3?
Yes, you can call, you would need to call typically the master business functions or multiple functions called in a certain sequence. You can call both business functions, master business functions, and NERs from the new release. So it might get a little complicated to do. It might be better to go to the application because it's all already built for you there. But if you need to call a master business function outside of the application, you can do it starting with 9243.
Okay, another question here. Have you found any workarounds for when an orchestration includes a list element, especially when the list can continue to expand?
Read that one again, please.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so have you found any workarounds for when an orchestration includes a list element, especially when the list can continue to expand?
So I'm not sure if I completely understand the question, but if we're talking about like a list, kind of like we did with the business units, I mean, it's going to be doing, if you do any type of reads to a table, whether it's by querying on a QB line or filtering using a data request or something like that, then it's going to, anytime it runs, it's going to run real time against that data. So, as the list expands, unless you have something in there that would not include one of the, it's had an extra data item that would prevent whatever you added to the list from showing up in that list, it'll continue to operate as you expand. And that was one of the advantages of why, we decided to use like the UDC and combination with some of the cat codes and things like that, because everything would be, controlled on the JD Edwards side, as opposed to having to go back into Orchestrator and add something to a list.
Okay, a couple more questions for you here, Brian. Can you use a spreadsheet to input a value?
You can use a CSV file on an FTP site. So starting roughly around, it looks like 9224, possibly, or maybe it was 923. Actually, I believe it was 923. You're able to import a CSV file. It has to be on an FTP site, so it can't just be a standard network folder. But you can basically consume the data from that spreadsheet and you can run it through an orchestration. So if you needed to create an item or update, think about like mass updates for item branch records maybe. You could have all those fields on a spreadsheet, drop them on your FTP site, kick off the orchestration, and it would go through and it can actually iterate over all the rows on the spreadsheet and do like a mass update to item branch or something like that.
Okay, so we've got a decent amount of questions left and we're getting close on time. So we'll do one more and then we'll definitely follow up with anybody we missed. So let's see, last one for you for now, Brian. First, we've got a couple of thank you for the demos in here. So I want to make sure to mention that. But last question for now, how would you run the item branch orchestration using an input file, Excel, instead of manually entering the information?
So if you were doing it in conjunction with an item master record, as long as you had the branch data in a CSV file, like I said, on an FTP server, you could actually enter in the item master record, and then as part of the orchestration, you would use a connector, connect to the spreadsheet on the FTP using a connector and a connection, and then you could iterate over that spreadsheet to either add or update the data from the spreadsheet and create the item branch records, or you could, as we talked about, you could put an update path as well. So you can really do it either way.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, anybody we missed, we'll make sure to follow up with you after.
Yeah, certainly feel free to reach out, and I'll do my best to follow up. And once again, I truly appreciate everybody's time today joining our webinar. Like Dan kind of mentioned, we're definitely here to support the JD Edwards community. So feel free to reach out to any of us with questions, or if you need help with something, and we'll do our best to get you going in the right direction.
That's great. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Laurel. And thanks, everybody, for attending. And if there are any follow-ups, you guys know how to contact us. We appreciate your time today.